The unexpected arrival. The night the children arrived at Ethan Lawson's doorstep, the world outside had turned into a tempest. The rain pounded against the roof like 1,000 desperate fists, and the wind howled through the valley, bending trees and rattling windows. Ethan had just finished carving the final curve of a rocking chair, running his rough, calloused fingers over the smooth wood. The scent of sawdust and pine filled the air, a comforting aroma that had become his only companion in the years since Emily's passing. But that night, comfort was elusive. The first knock was soft, so soft that he might have ignored it had the storm not paused for a brief moment, as if holding its breath. Ethan glanced up from his work, his brow furrowing. Perhaps it was just the wind, he thought. But then it came again. A second knock, more insistent. Someone was out there. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and moved toward the door, his gut tightening. No one ever came to his house at this hour. The town of Brookridge was small, and people respected his solitude. Since losing Emily, he had become a ghost in his own life, going to town only when necessary, speaking only when spoken to. Whoever was at his door either didn't know that, or didn't care. Unlatching the bolt, he swung the door open, and what he saw made his breath hitch. 7 children stood huddled on his porch, their thin bodies trembling under the weight of the storm. The oldest, a girl of about 13, stood protectively in front of the others, shielding them with her arms. Her dark brown hair was plastered to her face, her clothes soaked and clinging to her small frame. In her arms, she cradled a baby, wrapped in what looked like an old, threadbare jacket. The other children, 6 of them, ranging in age from barely walking to early adolescence, clutched each other tightly, their wide eyes darting around in fear. They looked lost, exhausted, and utterly terrified. Ethan's first instinct was disbelief. How could children be out in a storm like this? Where were their parents? "Please," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring wind. "We need help." Ethan hesitated. Not because he didn't want to help, but because something about this scene felt wrong. Children didn't just appear on doorsteps in the middle of the night. He stepped forward, scanning the darkness beyond them. The road leading to his house was empty, no cars, no headlights, no sign of an adult nearby. Just the rain and the trees bending under the force of the wind. His house was secluded, sitting on the edge of town near the woods. Anyone who came here had to do so deliberately. Yet, there they were. 7 of them. Ethan exhaled slowly. Questions swirled in his mind, but they could wait. Right now, these kids needed warmth, food, and shelter. "Come inside," he said, stepping back. The girl hesitated for a brief moment before nodding, then ushered the others forward. One by one, the children crossed the threshold, their soaked shoes leaving muddy prints on his wooden floor. Ethan shut the door behind them, locking it out of instinct. The warmth of the house hit them immediately, and he could see the way their small shoulders relaxed slightly, though their eyes remained wary. They looked like kids who had learned not to trust too easily. Ethan hurried to the closet and pulled out every blanket he could find. He draped one over the oldest girl's shoulders first, then carefully covered the baby, whose tiny face was barely visible beneath the wet fabric of the jacket. One of the younger boys, no older than 6, was shivering violently. Ethan knelt in front of him, wrapping a thick wool blanket around his frame. "What's your name?" Ethan asked gently. The boy blinked up at him, lips trembling, but didn't answer. Instead, it was the oldest girl who spoke. "His name is Oliver," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, like someone who had been forced to grow up too soon. "I'm Ava. That's Max, Lily, Jason, Emma, and the baby is Noah." 7 names. 7 lives suddenly thrust into his. Ethan nodded slowly. "All right, Ava. Are you all hungry?" Ava hesitated, glancing at the others before nodding. Ethan stood and moved to the kitchen. He wasn't much of a cook, living alone, he rarely bothered with anything beyond simple meals. But he could make something warm. He heated a pot of soup, buttered some slices of bread, and poured cups of tea for the older kids. As he worked, he stole glances at them. They sat in a tight cluster on his living room rug, eating hungrily but cautiously, as if afraid someone might snatch the food away at any moment. It broke something inside of him. They had been through something. Something terrible. And he had a feeling they weren't ready to talk about it yet. He waited until they had eaten their fill before kneeling in front of Ava again. "You want to tell me what happened?" he asked gently. Ava tensed. We can't go back," she murmured. "They'll find us." Ethan's pulse quickened. "They?" She swallowed hard but didn't answer. Before Ethan could press further, a soft whimper cut through the silence. The baby, Noah, began to cry, a weak, exhausted sound. Ava rocked him gently, trying to soothe him, but he only cried harder. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "All right. You don't have to talk right now. But you're safe here, okay?" Ava looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Ethan met her gaze steadily. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. 7 children appearing out of nowhere. No explanation. No parents. Just fear and silence. And then, as if the night hadn't already been strange enough, there was another sound. A rustling outside. Ethan's muscles tensed. He stood slowly, moving toward the window. The storm had lessened, but the wind still whistled through the trees. And just beyond the reach of his porch light, a shadow moved. Someone was watching. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Whatever these kids were running from, it had followed them here. And he had just let it into his home. The shadow in the storm. Ethan's breath was steady, but his pulse pounded in his ears. He stood motionless by the window, staring into the darkness beyond his porch. The shadow had been there, he was sure of it. A fleeting glimpse, shifting between the trees, disappearing just as quickly as it had appeared. His instincts screamed danger. Behind him, the children huddled closer, their small bodies wrapped in the warmth of the blankets he had given them. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a flickering golden glow over their faces. Even though he could hear their breathing, even though they were right there in his home, safe from the storm outside, a gnawing sense of unease settled deep in his chest. Ava, the oldest, watched him carefully. She wasn't crying, wasn't panicking. Instead, her grip on the baby tightened, her fingers trembling as she held Noah against her chest. Her fear was silent, but it was there. And it told Ethan everything he needed to know. Whoever was out there, wasn't just passing through. They were looking for these children. Ethan stepped away from the window and locked the front door, checking the bolt twice. Then, he moved to the back door and did the same, testing the latch with careful precision. His house was old, but sturdy. If someone tried to break in, they'd have to make a hell of a lot of noise to do it. He turned back toward the children. "Are you running from someone?" His voice was calm, but firm. Ava's eyes darted toward the others before she nodded. Ethan crossed his arms. "Who?" She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then, finally, she whispered, "Bad people." The way she said it, the weight of those 2 simple words, sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "Are they looking for you?" Ava didn't respond right away. She lowered her gaze to the baby in her arms, her fingers gently smoothing down his tiny curls. For a moment, Ethan thought she wouldn't answer at all. But then, barely above a whisper, she said, "They always do." Ethan's jaw tightened. Whatever trouble these kids had been through, it wasn't something small. And it wasn't over. He let out a slow breath. "All right," he said, keeping his voice level. You don't have to tell me everything right now. But I need to know, are they dangerous? Ava nodded. They'll hurt us if they find us. Ethan swallowed the curse rising in his throat. 7 kids, alone, scared, and running from something dark enough that even speaking about it made them tremble. And now, they were in his house. He had a choice. He could take them back to town, hand them over to the authorities, and let someone else handle it. He could pretend this wasn't his problem. But one look at their faces, and he knew. He couldn't do that. Not to them. Not when every instinct in his body told him they had been let down before. Instead, he knelt down in front of Ava. Listen to me, he said softly. No one is going to hurt you here. You understand? Her eyes searched his face, as if testing the weight of his words. Then, finally, she nodded. Ethan reached into a chest near the fireplace and pulled out more blankets. You should all get some rest, he said. I'll keep watch. He saw the exhaustion in their eyes. The way their bodies sagged with weariness. But he also saw hesitation, lingering fear. Ava didn't move at first. Ethan understood. Trust wasn't something that came easy when you'd been forced to run. So, he did something he hadn't done in years. He softened. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. I promise, he said. You're safe. Slowly, Ava relented. She helped the others settle onto the large rug near the fire, their tiny bodies curling beneath the blankets. Even after they laid down, some of them kept their eyes open, watching, waiting, just in case. Ethan grabbed his rifle from above the mantel. He didn't need it often, but tonight, he kept it close. Then, he took a chair and positioned himself near the front door. He would not sleep. Not until he knew whatever was out there, was gone. Hours later. The house was silent except for the crackling of the dying fire. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Ethan remained alert, listening for any sound outside. But there was nothing. Maybe it had just been his imagination. Maybe the shadow had been a trick of the storm, nothing more. But then. A sound. Not from outside. From inside. A creaking floorboard. Ethan tensed. He turned his head slowly, scanning the room. The children were still sleeping by the fire, their bodies rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. But something felt off. Another creak. This time, it was closer. Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. He rose from his chair, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. Carefully, he moved toward the hallway, where the noise had come from. The air was colder there. And then. A whisper. A voice so faint he almost thought he imagined it. Ethan. He froze. His blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. It was impossible. His heart pounded as he reached the end of the hallway. His hand hovered over the doorknob of his bedroom, breath shallow, pulse hammering. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The room was dark. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting silver streaks across the wooden floor. Nothing was out of place. His bed was empty. His closet door was shut. But the air was thick with something he couldn't name. And then he saw it. A single footprint. Wet. Fresh. Leading away from the window. The same window he knew for a fact had been locked. Someone had been inside. Ethan's stomach twisted. He turned back toward the living room, his mind racing. He needed answers. Now. But as he stepped back into the room, his breath caught in his throat. Because Ava was awake. And she was already looking at him. As if she had been waiting. Whispers of the past. The house felt different. The warmth of the fire still flickered, casting soft, golden light across the room, but an unsettling chill settled deep into Ethan's bones. His breath was slow, deliberate. The weight of the rifle in his hands felt heavier than before. Ava sat up, her eyes locked onto his as if she had been expecting him. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened. "What did I see?" Ava glanced at the others. Noah stirred slightly in his sleep, his tiny fists curling against the fabric of her sweater. The other children were still, their breathing slow and steady. She turned her gaze back to Ethan, hesitating. He knelt in front of her, lowering his voice. "Ava, someone was in my room." She flinched, just slightly, but he caught it. "Who are you running from?" Ethan pressed. "Tell me the truth." Ava's lips trembled. She bit down on them, trying to stop the words from spilling out, but Ethan could see the fear in her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers curled protectively around Noah. "They always find us," she whispered. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Who?" Ava swallowed hard. Then, finally, she said it. "The people who took us." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Ethan studied her carefully, his mind racing. "Took you?" he echoed. "You mean, you were kidnapped?" Ava shook her head. "Not at first," she murmured. "At first, it was a home. A place for kids with nowhere to go. They called it the Haven." Ethan frowned. He had never heard of it before, and he knew most places in town. "They promised food, warmth, a family," Ava continued. "But they lied." Ethan's stomach churned. He didn't like where this was going. "They weren't a real orphanage," Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They took kids in, but they never let them leave." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He had known the world was cruel. He had seen enough suffering in his lifetime to understand that some people would do anything for power, for money. But this was something else entirely. He kept his voice steady. "What did they do to you?" Ava's hands trembled as she held the baby closer. "Some of the kids disappeared," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "They would take them away in the middle of the night. We never saw them again." Ethan's jaw clenched. "How did you escape?" Ava looked away. "One of the workers helped us," she said. "She said we had to leave that night, or we'd be next. She hid us in the back of a supply truck. But Ava's voice broke. She took a shaky breath. They caught her before she could get in. We heard her scream." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "They know we're gone," Ava continued. "And they'll come for us." Ethan's mind was already working. If what Ava said was true, these people weren't just dangerous, they were ruthless. And now, they knew these kids had escaped. And he had just put a target on his back by taking them in. Ethan stood abruptly. He turned, walking to the window again, scanning the dark tree-line beyond his porch. The wind had settled, but the night still carried an eerie stillness. His instincts screamed at him. He had spent years listening to those instincts, surviving things that should have killed him. And right now, every single one of them told him the same thing. He wasn't alone. Somebody was out there. Watching. Waiting. And they weren't going to stop. Ethan turned back to Ava. "They won't take you," he said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." Ava stared at him, wide-eyed, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Ethan grabbed his jacket and his old hunting knife, tucking it into his belt. Then he moved toward the front door and slid the deadbolt back. "What are you doing?" Ava asked, her voice filled with panic. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "I need to see if we're already too late." She reached out, grabbing his sleeve. "Don't go out there." "I have to." She shook her head furiously. "They're not normal," she whispered. Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" But before Ava could answer, something slammed against the back door. The entire house rattled. The children jolted awake, startled cries filling the air. Ethan spun around, his rifle raised. His pulse thundered in his ears. Another bang, this time, from the front. They were surrounded. Ethan moved quickly, positioning himself between the children and the door. "Get back," he ordered. The kids scrambled to the farthest corner of the room, huddling together. Ava pressed Noah against her chest, her eyes wild with terror. Ethan's grip tightened around the rifle. He took a slow breath, forcing his heart to steady. He had survived wars. He had faced men with weapons, men with nothing to lose. But this was different. Because whoever was outside wasn't just here to take the kids. They were here to erase them. And Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. Another slam, this time against the window. The glass shuddered, but held. A voice cut through the silence. Low. Cold. "Give them back." Ethan didn't move. "Give them back, old man," the voice repeated, sharper this time. "And we won't kill you." Ethan exhaled slowly, setting his stance. His trigger finger hovered, ready. And then, in the dim glow of the firelight, he saw the doorknob turn. The siege. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. The metal doorknob twisted again, slow and deliberate. He raised the rifle, bracing it against his shoulder. His finger hovered over the trigger. He had spent years living in quiet solitude, drowning in grief and routine, but this moment pulled him back to the man he used to be, the one who had fought, survived, and done whatever it took to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Ava clutched Noah tighter, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The other children huddled together in the corner, their terrified eyes darting between Ethan and the front door. Then, silence. The tension stretched, thick and suffocating. Whoever was outside had stopped moving. They were waiting. Watching. Ethan's gut told him this wasn't just a simple break-in. These weren't common criminals. These were professionals, calculated, patient, and ruthless. The voice came again, closer this time. "Give them back, Carter." The hairs on the back of his neck rose. They knew his name. His grip on the rifle tightened. "Who are you?" he called out, keeping his voice steady. "What do you want?" A low chuckle echoed through the night. "You already know what we want." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. Ava's story had been vague, but it was clear these children had escaped something far worse than an orphanage. And now, the people who had once caged them wanted them back. Not happening. Ethan took a slow step forward, keeping his gun trained on the door. His house was sturdy, built with thick wood and reinforced windows, but it wasn't impenetrable. He had two options: wait them out or make the first move. Ava's voice trembled. "Ethan, they won't stop. They crash." Glass shattered from the back of the house. The children screamed. Ethan spun around. "Stay down," he ordered, moving swiftly toward the sound. Through the dim light, he saw movement, a dark figure slipping through the broken window near the kitchen. Ethan raised his rifle and fired. Boom! The blast echoed through the house, sending wood splinters flying. The figure ducked, rolling out of sight before the bullet struck home. Heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor. More of them. Ethan's stomach sank. This wasn't just one man. This was a coordinated attack. He had to move fast. "Ava. Take the kids to the basement," he ordered. "Now." Ava hesitated, frozen in fear. "Ava, go." She snapped out of it, scrambling toward the hidden basement door near the pantry. One by one, she ushered the children inside. Ethan turned back to the hallway just as another shadow moved. He fired again. The figure dove behind the counter, narrowly avoiding the shot. A second later, a gunshot rang out from outside, sending wood splinters raining down on Ethan's shoulder. They were trying to pin him down. Ethan ducked behind the kitchen island, his mind working fast. He was outnumbered. They had firepower, training, and numbers. But he had something they didn't, his home. He knew every corner, every hidden nook, every weak spot. And he wasn't going down without a fight. The plan. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He could hear them moving, 2 men inside, at least 1 outside. Maybe more. They were closing in. He needed to take them out, one by one. Reaching into the drawer beneath the island, he pulled out a hunting knife and a small, makeshift smoke bomb he had built years ago, something he used to scare off bears when he went deep into the woods. It would have to do. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the smoke bomb into the next room. A sharp hiss filled the air. Within seconds, thick, gray smoke billowed through the house, swallowing everything in a dense fog. Shouts erupted from the intruders. Ethan used the distraction. He moved quickly, low to the ground, circling behind the figure nearest the pantry. Through the smoke, he caught a glimpse of the man's silhouette, tall, armed, but unaware of Ethan creeping up behind him. In one swift motion, Ethan grabbed the man's collar and drove his knife deep into his side. The man gasped, choking on his own breath. Ethan pulled the blade free and shoved him to the ground. No time to hesitate. Another voice called out. "Troy? You good?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the fallen man's gun and slid behind the dining table, waiting. Footsteps approached cautiously. Ethan's pulse slowed. Focused. The soldier in him took over. The second man stepped into view, scanning the room. The smoke was clearing, but his eyes hadn't adjusted yet. Ethan didn't give him a chance. He fired. The man crumpled. 2 down. A crash from the living room told him the last man had broken in. Ethan shifted, moving silently toward the front of the house. He saw the final intruder, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black jacket, aiming his gun toward the basement door. Ava and the kids. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged, slamming into the man with his full weight. The gun fired, but the shot went wild, burying into the floor. The man was strong. He fought back, throwing a punch that caught Ethan's jaw. Stars exploded behind his eyes, but he held on. They grappled, tumbling across the floor. The man reached for his gun. Ethan knocked it aside, sending it skidding under the couch. Then, with a final surge of strength, Ethan slammed the man's head against the floor. Once. Twice. The body went limp. Silence. Ethan panted, his vision swimming. It was over. For now. Aftermath. Ethan staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. The house was a wreck, glass, splintered wood, and smoke lingering in the air. He moved quickly to the basement door. "Ava," he called. After a moment, it creaked open. Ava peeked out, her face pale. "Are they gone?" Ethan nodded. For now. One by one, the children emerged. Their faces were filled with fear, but also something else, trust. They trusted him. Ethan exhaled, glancing at the bodies on the floor. This wasn't over. Whoever these men worked for, they would send more. He had just made himself an enemy of something much bigger. His gaze hardened. He had spent years trying to escape the past, to live a quiet life. But fate had other plans. These kids weren't just running from danger. They were part of something much larger. And Ethan Carter had just declared war, the reckoning. Ethan stood amidst the wreckage of his once peaceful cabin, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The bodies of the intruders lay motionless, a grim reminder that the quiet life he had built was now over. Ava held Noah tightly, her knuckles white from gripping the boy's shoulders. The other children peeked from behind her, their wide eyes darting between Ethan and the fallen men. No one spoke for several long seconds. Then, Ava whispered, "They'll send more." Ethan knew she was right. This wasn't the kind of enemy that gave up. Whoever these men worked for, they had resources, reach, and most importantly, a reason to hunt these kids down. Ethan reloaded his rifle, his jaw tightening. "They can come," he muttered. "They won't leave." Ava swallowed hard. "You don't understand. They're not just criminals or bounty hunters. They're—" A gurgling noise came from behind Ethan. One of the downed intruders coughed, clutching his stomach where blood seeped through his fingers. Ethan was on him in an instant, slamming a boot onto his chest. The man gasped, his body weak from blood loss, but he still managed to smirk. "You have no idea who you're messing with," the intruder rasped. Ethan crouched, pressing down harder. "Then tell me." The man chuckled, though it was broken and wet. "They'll never stop. You have something they want." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "The kids?" The man gave a slow, weak shake of his head. "Not just them. Her." His bloodied fingers twitched in Ava's direction. Ethan glanced back at her. Ava's face had gone pale, her eyes darting with panic. Ethan turned back to the man. "Who are you working for?" The man exhaled shakily, his strength fading. He let out one final whisper before the light drained from his eyes. "Project Genesis." Then he was gone. Ethan stood slowly, the name sending a cold chill down his spine. He had heard it before. Years ago. Before he left the military. Before he buried the man he used to be. Before he became a ghost. A past that won't stay buried. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing his breathing to steady. The children were still watching him, still waiting for him to decide what came next. He turned to Ava. "What is Project Genesis?" She hesitated, glancing at the kids before shaking her head. "It's not safe to talk here." Ethan studied her. The fear in her eyes wasn't just fear of the men who had come tonight. It was deeper. Older. She had been running for a long time. He nodded. "Pack what you need. We're leaving in 5 minutes." Ava's brows furrowed. "Where are we going?" Ethan slung his rifle over his shoulder and moved toward a hidden panel in the wall. With a few practiced motions, he opened a concealed storage compartment, revealing a black duffel bag. He unzipped it, pulling out extra ammo, a satellite phone, and an old, battered ID badge with a name he hadn't used in years. Carter. Ethan Carter. Not the reclusive hunter. Not the grieving man who lost everything. But the operative. The soldier. The ghost. He shoved the ID into his pocket and looked back at Ava. "To someone who can give me answers." The escape. They moved fast, packing only essentials. The cabin was no longer safe. Within an hour, whoever these men reported to would realize something had gone wrong. More would come. Ethan loaded the kids into his truck, a rugged, beat-up old Chevy that looked as harmless as a farm vehicle but was reinforced under the hood. He had modified it years ago, just in case. Tonight, just in case had turned into absolutely necessary. Ava sat in the passenger seat, her hands gripping her lap as she glanced back at the children. Noah sat closest to her, his small hands wrapped around a stuffed rabbit. Ethan started the engine. "We're heading west," he said, pulling out onto the dark forest road. Ava frowned. "West?" What's there? An old friend. He didn't offer more. He needed to get distance first. Answers could come later. But as they drove through the winding roads, headlights suddenly flared in the rearview mirror. 2 black SUVs. Closing in. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. They found us. Ava turned, her breath catching. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas, the truck roaring forward. The SUVs followed, tires screeching against the asphalt. Shots fired. Bullets pinged off the truck's reinforced frame. The children screamed. Ethan swerved hard, taking a sharp turn onto a dirt path barely visible through the darkness. Trees blurred past. He cut the headlights, relying on his memory of the terrain. The SUVs followed, but they weren't as familiar with the land. Ethan hit the brakes. The first SUV overshot the curve, slamming into a tree with a violent crunch. The second swerved, barely correcting itself before continuing the pursuit. Ethan took another sharp turn, then suddenly killed the engine. Darkness swallowed them whole. The second SUV sped past, unable to track them in time. Ethan waited a beat, then turned the engine back on and veered off into a hidden side path, heading deeper into the wilderness. The safe house. 2 hours later, they arrived at an abandoned gas station near the outskirts of a deserted town. Ethan led them inside, checking every entrance and exit before locking the doors. Ava hugged the children, whispering reassurances. Ethan pulled out the satellite phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over a decade. A gruff voice answered. "You're supposed to be dead." Ethan exhaled. "Nice to hear your voice too, Marcus." A pause. Then. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Ethan glanced back at Ava and the kids. "The kind that doesn't go away." Another pause. "Where are you?" Ethan gave him the location. Marcus sighed. "I'll be there in 4 hours. Don't die before then." Ethan smirked grimly. "No promises." He hung up. Then turned back to Ava. "Time to talk," he said. "What the hell is Project Genesis?" Ava hesitated. Then she took a deep breath. And everything Ethan thought he knew about the world shattered.